Ready for a deep dive into leadership and what makes some organizations tick? We'll be looking at Simon Sinek's Leaders Eat Last, along with some historical stuff and even real world examples, to get a good look at all this.
Sounds fascinating.
So we'll try to answer some big questions like why are some companies just awesome at getting people to be super loyal and creative? What about how our brains work? All the hormones and brain chemicals that make us act certain ways at work.
But I think that's a really interesting point about the biology of it all.
Right. And to make sure we don't get lost, we've got an expert in all things organizations and leadership here to help us out.
Happy to be here.
So let's just jump right into it with Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last. It's all about people first, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Sinek argues that leaders who put their team first create a circle of safety, almost like a protective barrier that leads to trust and everyone working together.
Or like a shield.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. And that helps people take risks and be more creative and really go above and beyond.
that's such a good visual. And Sinek uses some pretty powerful examples in the book, like that story about Captain Mike Drowley.
Johnny Bravo.
Oh, yeah, Johnny Bravo.
So Captain Drowley, he was an A-10 pilot in Afghanistan, and he got a call that troops were trapped and taking heavy fire. And he decided to fly down through some really thick clouds to protect them.
Wow. That's
It's called a weather letdown, and it's super risky.
And he didn't even have to do it right. He could have just stayed at a safe altitude. But he knew those soldiers needed help, so he put their lives before his own, and because of that, 22 men made it home.
It's a perfect example of putting your team first. Real courage,
Yeah,
taking responsibility.
absolutely. Then there's the example of Bob Chapman. He's the CEO of Barry Wemmeler. When the economy was bad, he did things a little differently.
Yeah, instead of firing people, he started this mandatory furlough program.
What's that?
Basically, everyone from Chapman himself to the people working in the factories had to take 4 weeks off without pay.
Wow. So everyone shared the burden.
Exactly. No one was singled out and no one lost their job.
That's amazing. He wasn't just thinking about saving money. He was showing his people that they were important, that they were all in it together.
And you know what? It really worked. The employees, they all came together to help each other. Some even took more unpaid time off to help their coworkers who were struggling.
It's like the whole company just got tougher.
They showed how loyal they were.
Those stories really show how important it is to understand people, to actually care about your employees.
Empathy's huge. You can't treat people like they're just robots or something.
Right. Sinek says that to get trust, you have to give trust.
That's the foundation.
Okay, so Sinek also talks about the science behind trust and how we work together, like all those chemicals in our brains that make us act certain ways.
Those are fascinating. He focuses on 4 in particular: endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin.
Endorphins. That's like the runner's high, right?
Yep. They kick in when you're stressed,
Yeah.
like a natural painkiller that helps you keep going.
Interesting. Then there's dopamine. That's the one that makes you feel good when you achieve something.
It's all about rewards and motivation.
So like when you finish a huge project and you feel great about it.
That's dopamine. It pushes you to achieve your goals.
I see. What about serotonin?
Serotonin is more about your social status and getting recognition, that feeling of pride and importance.
So like when you get promoted or people praise you for your work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a good feeling. And finally, we have oxytocin, which is often called the love hormone.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
It's all about trust, bonding, and connection.
Now I'm starting to see how this all ties back to that circle of safety.
When you feel safe and supported, your brain releases oxytocin
And that makes you want to work with people more.
and take more risks. It's a positive cycle of trust.
But what happens when that trust breaks down? Like when companies only care about profits and forget about their people?
That's where things can go wrong. Sinek talks about the 2008 financial crisis, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and even the decline of news media in America.
Wow, that's a lot of different examples.
And they all show how putting profit above everything else can be really harmful.
So focusing too much on making money can make you lose sight of what's right and wrong.
He calls it destructive abundance. Having too much stuff, money, resources, even information, can disconnect you from the people you're supposed to be serving.
It's like getting so caught up in the excitement of success that you forget about the human cost.
Exactly.
Sinek contrasts his examples with companies like Costco.
Costco's founder, James Sinek, he really believed in treating his employees well. Fair wages, good benefits, a positive place to work.
He was totally different from those Wall Street guys.
He knew that if his employees were happy, his customers would be happy, and the business would succeed.
And it worked. Costco's been doing great. It shows you don't have to treat people badly to make money.
He understood that circle of safety. Valuing your employees leads to good things.
It's like that saying, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. So Sinek also talks about technology and social media and how it's affecting younger generations. He calls them the abstract generation.
It's a fascinating idea. It's like they're growing up in a different world with all this technology and instant gratification.
So they're trading real-world connections for virtual ones.
And that might have consequences we don't even fully understand yet. He even brings up the increase in school shootings as a possible effect of people feeling isolated.
That's a sobering thought.
Definitely something to think about.
Luckily, Sinek doesn't leave us on a totally negative note. He talks about this powerful antidote, and it goes back to the idea of helping others.
It's what he calls Step 12, like in Alcoholics Anonymous, where people help each other as part of their recovery.
So focusing on helping others actually helps you too.
That's the idea. Sinek thinks this applies to everything in life. Whether it's at work, in your community, or in your personal relationships, helping others creates a ripple effect and makes things better for everyone.
It's a good reminder that leadership isn't about bossing people around or climbing the ladder.
It's about helping people reach their potential and making sure everyone feels valued.
So far, this deep dive has been really insightful. Sinek manages to connect all these different ideas like leadership and biology and history into this compelling story.
He's great at explaining complex things.
Now let's go beyond Sinek's theories and look at some real-world examples of leadership in action. There's this great story about a nuclear submarine, the USS Santa Fe, and its captain, David Marquet. It really shows the difference between a controlling leader and one who empowers people.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. When Marquet took over the Santa Fe, it was ranked dead last. He knew something had to change.
What was the problem?
The old way of doing things, the command and control style, was actually holding the crew back.
I bet in that kind of high-stakes environment, one little mistake could be disastrous.
Absolutely. That's why Marquet decided to do something radical. He shifted from the leader knows everything to let's empower everyone.
Wow. So instead of giving orders, he gave his crew responsibility.
You got it. He encouraged them to think for themselves, take ownership, and speak up if something wasn't right, even if it meant questioning him.
That's a big change, especially in the military.
It was a risk, but it paid off big time. The Santa Fe went from worst to first in the whole fleet. Their performance and safety records were amazing.
All because he trusted his crew to make decisions based on their expertise.
That's the power of empowerment.
This reminds me of that idea of destructive abundance that Sinek talks about. Can you explain that a little more?
Basically, Sinek says that having too much of anything can be bad. Too much wealth, resources, information. It can make you lose touch with the people you're supposed to be helping.
He uses the 2008 financial crisis as an example, right?
Yeah, a perfect example. The pursuit of profit became so disconnected from responsibility that it led to a global meltdown.
It's like everyone was so focused on making money that they forgot about the consequences.
And he also brings up the decline of American news media, which might seem kind of strange at first.
What does that have to do with destructive abundance?
Sinek argues that news media went down a similar path. The focus shifted from informing the public to making money and attracting viewers at any cost.
So it's not just about greed, it's about losing sight of your purpose.
Right. And that loss of trust in the media has had a huge impact on society.
It makes it harder to have real conversations about important issues.
And it undermines accountability.
Okay, so how do we avoid falling into that trap?
Sinek points to leaders like James Sinegal from Costco. He was all about taking care of his employees even when other companies were cutting costs and laying people off.
He was a real outlier, wasn't he?
He believed that if you treat your employees well, they'll be more productive and loyal, and the business will thrive.
And he was right. Costco has been incredibly successful. It's proof that you can be profitable and ethical.
He understood that circle of safety. It all comes back to that.
Okay, now let's talk about something a little darker. The whole idea of obedience to authority. Sinek uses the Milgram experiment to illustrate this.
Oh yeah, that one's a classic. You know the one where people were told to give electric shock to someone else?
It's kind of disturbing,
It showed how easy it is for people to do bad things when they're following orders.
even if they know it's wrong.
The experiment found that we're way more susceptible to authority than we think. We might even go against our own morals if someone in charge tells us to.
That's scary. What happens when people in power abuse that authority?
It's a crucial question. That's why ethical leadership is so important. Leaders need to create a culture where people feel safe to speak up and do the right thing, even if it means challenging authority.
So it's about giving people the power to say no to something that's wrong.
Exactly.
Now let's switch gears and talk about how culture affects innovation. Sinek uses the example of 3M, the company that makes Post-it notes.
Ah, 3M. They're known for being super innovative.
What's their secret?
They've created a culture where people are encouraged to work together, share ideas, and experiment. It's not about competition, it's about collaboration.
And has led to a ton of successful products.
Thousands of patents. It shows that the best ideas often come from unexpected places.
So they're open to ideas from anyone.
That's the key to fostering innovation.
Now let's talk about integrity. Sinek says it's not just about being honest, but about living up to your word.
He tells this great story from Marine Corps Officer Candidate School. A candidate fell asleep during training, which is a big no-no. When he was confronted, he lied about it, even when they had proof.
So he wasn't willing to own up to his mistake.
Only when he got caught. And the Marine Corps, they're all about taking responsibility, even when it's tough.
It's about setting an example.
Walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Sinek says this applies to all organizations. When leaders lack integrity, it creates a culture of mistrust.
People are afraid to speak up, and that's when ethical problems happen.
So integrity starts at the top.
Absolutely.
Sinek also talks about the downsides of focusing too much on shareholder value. What does he mean by that?
Well, for decades, the main goal of most businesses has been to maximize profits for shareholders. But Sinek argues that this has led to some unintended negative consequences.
Like what?
It's encouraged short-term thinking. Companies are so focused on quarterly earnings that they neglect long-term sustainability.
And it's led to huge pay gaps between CEOs and regular employees.
Plus, it puts pressure on companies to cut costs, which often means layoffs and outsourcing.
So it's like a race to the bottom.
Sinek thinks we need to find a better balance. We need to consider the well-being of employees, customers, and the community, not just shareholders.
It's about creating a more sustainable and ethical form of capitalism.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about the challenges facing younger generations. Sinek calls them the abstract generation.
This is where things get really interesting. Sinek argues that young people who've grown up immersed in technology might be developing differently.
In what way?
They're bombarded with information, they're used to instant gratification, and they interact more through screens than face-to-face.
So their experience of the world is filtered through technology.
Exactly. And while technology has its benefits, Sinek worries about the potential downsides.
Like shorter attention spans and less empathy.
He thinks it might be contributing to rising rates of anxiety, depression, and even suicide among young people.
Those are serious concerns. What can we do about it?
Sinek stresses the importance of balance. We need to encourage real-world interactions and help young people find purpose beyond the digital world.
It's a challenge for all of us.
Now, Sinek takes this idea a step further by comparing the challenges young people face today to what happened during the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
That's an interesting comparison. What does he see as the connection?
Well, think about it. The Industrial Revolution brought massive changes to society. New technologies, factories, people moving to cities. It was a time of upheaval.
Kind of like the digital revolution we're going through now.
Exactly. Sinek sees parallels between the two eras. Both were marked by disruption, uncertainty, and anxieties about the future.
So history might be repeating itself in a way.
And just like society adapted to the Industrial Revolution, Sinek believes we can adapt to the digital age. It's going to take effort, though.
We need to find new ways to support each other and create a more resilient society.
It's about using technology wisely while preserving what's important about human connection.
Oh, let's bring this back to the workplace. Sinek talks about the difference between finite games and infinite games.
Ah, yes. He says most businesses operate with a finite game mindset. They're focused on winning, beating the competition, and making as much money as possible.
It's like a football game. There's a clear winner and loser.
Right. But Sinek suggests we should view business and life in general as an infinite game.
What does that mean?
In an infinite game, the goal is to keep playing. It's about continuous learning, adaptation, and building something that lasts.
So instead of short-term wins, it's about the long game.
Companies that play the infinite game focus on building strong cultures, developing their people, and making a positive impact.
It's a different way of thinking about success.
And it requires a different kind of leadership.
What kind of leadership does the infinite game require?
Leaders who embrace the infinite game encourage collaboration, experimentation, and long-term thinking. They're not obsessed with beating the competition at all costs.
It sounds like a much more sustainable and fulfilling way to run a business.
Now let's focus on a specific area where Sinek's ideas are really important: education.
He dedicates a whole chapter to education. Why does he think it's so crucial?
Sinek sees education as the foundation of a strong society. He believes schools should be about more than just test scores and memorization.
He's critical of the current system, isn't he?
He thinks it's too focused on standardized tests and not enough on preparing students for the real world.
So what does he propose instead?
He wants a more holistic approach to education, one that values creativity, problem-solving, and emotional intelligence.
He also talks about the challenges teachers face.
Yeah, he's concerned about teacher burnout and the lack of support they often receive. He thinks we need to do more to value and support educators
Give them the resources they need to do their jobs well.
and give them more autonomy in the classroom.
Sinek's ideas about education are definitely thought-provoking.
It's a call to rethink how we prepare young people for the future.
Okay, now let's shift gears again and look at some of Sinek's advice for individuals. He talks a lot about the importance of building strong relationships.
He believes genuine connection, empathy, and trust are essential for our well-being and happiness.
He also talks about finding your why, your purpose in life.
He thinks having a clear sense of purpose makes you more motivated, resilient, and fulfilled.
It gives you a reason to get out of bed in the morning,
And he offers tips on how to build trust in your relationships.
like being vulnerable, honest, and consistent.
Those are key. Trust is built over time through small acts of kindness and reliability.
It's about being intentional in your relationships.
Sinek also addresses the impact of technology on our personal lives.
He's concerned about social media addiction, isn't he?
Yeah, he thinks it can be very distracting and addictive. He encourages us to be mindful of our screen time and prioritize real-life interactions.
It's about finding a healthy balance.
So Sinek's insights go beyond the workplace. They apply to all aspects of life.
This deep dive has been really insightful. Sinek covers a lot of ground.
He's a real thought leader.
But before we wrap up, there's one more thing we need to talk about. The potential downsides of dopamine.
Ah, yes. Dopamine is a powerful motivator, but it can also be a problem if we're not careful.
What are some of the dangers of too much dopamine?
Think about all the things that can be addictive. Social media, video games, even work itself. When we get hooked on that dopamine rush, it can lead to unhealthy behaviors.
We're constantly chasing that next hit of pleasure.
And it can leave us feeling empty and dissatisfied even when we achieve our goals.
So how do we find that balance?
Sinek encourages us to find joy in the process, not just the outcome. He also talks about gratitude, mindfulness, and connecting with our values.
It's about finding fulfillment from within, not from external things.
Exactly. Now, how does all this relate to leadership?
Good question. What's the connection between dopamine and leadership?
Well, good leaders understand that dopamine can be both a motivator and a manipulator. They know how to create environments where people are intrinsically motivated, not just driven by rewards.
So instead of just dangling carrots in front of people, leaders should focus on creating meaningful work.
That's the key. People need to feel a sense of purpose and ownership.
This discussion about dopamine has added a whole new dimension to our understanding of leadership.
It shows how complex human behavior is.
Now let's turn our attention to Sinek's exploration of technology and social media and how it's affecting society as a whole. This is where he introduces the idea of the abstract generation. It's like their whole world is online. It makes you wonder how that shapes their view of things.
Right. And Sinek worries that all this focus on instant gratification and technology is making us less empathetic as a society.
Like we're losing that human connection.
Exactly. And it's leading to less trust between people. It's harder to disagree respectfully and find common ground.
You see it everywhere these days,
Mhm.
especially in politics.
Oh, absolutely. It's like everyone's retreated into their own little bubbles where they just hear what they want to hear.
And it just gets more and more divisive.
Sinek's point is that when we focus too much on individual success and getting validation from others, we lose sight of the bigger picture.
We forget about community and shared values.
It's like we've become addicted to that dopamine rush.
So is there any way to break free from this cycle?
Sinek thinks so. He talks about the importance of real human connection, shared struggles, and finding a purpose beyond just ourselves. Remember that story about the university fundraisers?
Yeah, the ones who were struggling until they met the students who were benefiting from the scholarships they were raising money for?
It was that personal connection that reignited their passion. They could actually see the impact of their work.
It's like we all need to feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves.
Exactly. Sinek also talks about the power of going through tough times together. He uses World War II as an example.
When everyone was united against a common enemy.
Even though there was hardship and sacrifice, it was a time of incredible unity and purpose.
They say that going through tough times with someone really shows you who they are.
Sinek thinks we need to find ways to recreate that sense of shared struggle in our modern lives. It could be through volunteering or community projects or just being more present in our relationships.
It's about building trust and working towards something together.
And who plays a key role in creating that kind of environment? Leaders, of course.
They set the example.
They build that circle of safety where everyone feels valued and supported. They inspire people to look beyond their own self-interest.
Which brings us full circle back to Sinek's main message. Leaders eat last.
It's about putting others first, creating a culture where everyone can thrive.
Well, this deep dive has been a wild ride. We've covered so much ground.
It's been great.
So for our listeners out there, I'll leave you with this. How can you apply the ideas from Leaders Eat Last to your own life? Whether it's at work in your community or with your family and friends, how can you create that circle of safety and make everyone feel valued?
It's a question worth thinking about.
It might just be the key to a happier and more meaningful life. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and a big thanks to our expert for sharing their insights.